I said during the introduction, we are going to talk on how to make money with cattle farming. And that's what every farmer wants and needs to do, is to make money. Now, to do that, we need expert advice. And that's why we are so privileged to have a panel of very knowledgeable people with us today. And as I said, South African, or I believe that South African beef cattle production industry is rated among the very best in the world. If one considers the fact that some breeders the other day were prepared to pay 4.4 million rand for a Bonsmara bull. And then they wouldn't have paid that kind of money if there wasn't money to be made from that. And also the fact that we recently realized a record South African price of 20,000 rand for a single semen straw from a Beefmaster bull. Now, to find out more about all the hows and whys and whens of profitable and sustainable beef cattle production, I'm handing over now to our panel.
Thank you, Annelie, and thank you to the panelists. Greetings to viewers and listeners at home, and also to our team of panelists. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Farmers Week also for organizing this webinar today. My name is Thokozani Ndonga. I'm one of the panelists today. I'm working at Agricultural Research Council in Irene, animal production, as a senior research technician under a unit called National Beef Recording and Improvement Scheme, where I'm involved in facilitating interaction and technology transfer and information dissemination to industry stakeholders. Thank you.
Next panelist, please introduce yourself. And or on the other hand, Thokozani, I think you can carry on with your presentation.
Okay, no, that's wonderful. Thank you. Today, I will be sharing information with regards to how a farmer can get started with beef cattle farming and how to choose the right breed for your farming. In other words, it's about sustainability and profitability in your farming environment. So as a farmer, before you start beef cattle enterprise, you need to ask yourself some questions like, will the enterprise bring return on my investment? And also, am I ready as a farmer to start with this beef cattle enterprise? And also, do I have enough time available, because you will need to spend more time in your farm? So once you have identified and asked yourself those questions, and maybe you feel that you are comfortable and you are ready, and now you need to ask yourself, what type of breed do I need to farm with? So that you need a breed that will make sure that you achieve your goals and objectives for your farming that you have set at the beginning. But as a farmer, there are such as a startup beginning, there are so many factors that you need to consider. For instance, if you want to start a farm, one need to understand or to know how much land do you need as a farmer. Because when you start, you will need to have a viable farming production. So a viable farm will have at least a minimum of, let's say, 750 hectares. But again, it will depend on the various conditions, on the various factors like climate, like soil type, terrain, vegetation that is in the area that you want to establish a farm. But a minimum of 750 will be a viable farm. And also, there are some factors that you need to consider, like infrastructure. When you talk about infrastructure, maybe you can think of things like fencing, because for you to start that proper farming, you need to have a fenced farming area with regards to camps. And also, you will need also to ensure that you have enough proper handling facilities in terms of farmyards, crush pens, and your net clamps. But to get all those actually set of items or set of infrastructure that you want, you need also to work closer with your local agricultural cooperatives, because they are the one who can provide with such information to say, if maybe you want to build a structure in terms of infrastructure in so much land, how much material would you need as a farmer. You need also to ensure that the area that you will be farming with, does it have enough water? Both the source of water in terms of streams, in terms of wells, in terms of rivers, as well as underground water. Because in some areas you will need to have underground water in order for you to ensure that maybe if you think of trying to get some boreholes, it won't be actually difficult for you to access that. But water retention capacity is very important. And also you need to ensure that you have equipment in terms of machinery. The common machinery that is always needed in the farm is a tractor for various actually operational activities. You need a tractor to ensure that if we have some pastures, you can bale easier. But again, you need to ask yourself, do I need to buy a new tractor or a new machine? Or do I need to buy a used machine? Or do I need to rent out? And then playing around all those options, you can maybe find the best option that you know that it won't actually affect your profitability in your farm. And also, you must ensure that in terms of infrastructure, you have your proper handling facilities that is fitted with a net clamp. But some of the farmers, maybe because of the financial status, will that sometimes can be difficult at the initial stage to have all the equipment, but the basic one should be actually the proper handling facility where you can be able to work your animals in a proper way. Because remember, some of the animals, as you will be starting as a farmer, they are big in size. For instance, a bull can weigh up to 1 ton, let's say maybe 900 kg. So if you are not familiar with handling those animals, you might actually be afraid to even start handling that animal. But if you have a proper handling infrastructure, it will make all those activities very easy. So we will use that actual handling facility for various management activities like dehorning, branding your animals, animal identification, castration, doing pregnancy diagnosis, weighing all your animals, and also marking your animals as well. So there are various activities that need to be handled out within that handling facilities. And also the most important one is actually a cattle weighing scale. That cattle weighing scale will help you as a farmer because you need to monitor the growth performance of your animals and also to determine if this animal is efficient, and also to ensure that once you take that animal to the market, it will give you at least a reasonable amount of money. You will need to know the weight of your animals in different stages of production. For instance, when you are weaning your calves, you need to know their weaning weight, so that if you consider taking them to the market versus the amount that the market is providing that time, you can be able to determine if your winner production group will be actually profitable or not. And based on the winning records that you will achieve in a certain year or in a particular year, the following year you can be able to compare actually the previous winner weight in your farms. That also will enforce you as a farmer to start practicing proper record keeping as well as accurate record keeping, because they are the best management tool to ensure the efficiency and profitability of your farm. You need also, as a farmer, to ensure that you have water and feeding troughs, so that the water that is existing in your farm is collected in some setting points. Preferably, when we talk about feeding water troughs, they should be in an area where the animals are grazing, to avoid animals walking long distance from the water point to the grazing area. So it's advisable to be within that grazing area, to have some points where you can collect water. And also the equipment in terms of pipes, the size of pipes to be suitable to transport that water or to collect that water from various water points. I've mentioned earlier that you might be collecting that water maybe from a stream, from the river, or from boreholes. So it's advisable to get the best suitable pipe size, so that all that water can be actually transmitted to various points in your farm where you need it to be. As well as the feeding troughs are very important to have feeding troughs in your farm, because to avoid feed spoilage. Because if you just throw feed in maybe anywhere in the ground, that will be wastage. It's advisable as well that those feeding troughs also, they can be, in terms of structure, they can be structured firmly in the soil, so that they are not easily movable, and also make some space in between those feeding troughs, so at least of 2 meters, so that you avoid cattle. We'll find that maybe cattle will be knocking out those feeding troughs, but if they are fixed in a firmly in the soil, it won't be easy for those animals to knock them off. The other important issue also is the electricity. You need to have a point of electricity in the farm. It can be a source of solar, or it can be a source of municipal connection, but because there are some activities that you will need to have to do that will require actually a point of connection in terms of electricity. You can also have a generator backup in case, as we know that we experience a lot of load shedding these times, but electricity will be important. The infrastructure that we'll be talking about at some point, you need to be welded. At some point, you will need to be extending some setting, actually, housing facility for your cattle, as well as for your feed storage. So also, it's very important that as a farmer, you must have all those types of infrastructure. Because when you have feed or you have prepared some forage or fodder, you need to store in a safe and dry environment to avoid spoilage. So all those infrastructure are very important in your farming setup or in your farming environment to achieve actually the high profitability. Yes, also in terms of transportation, you might need to have a bakkie, but that doesn't mean that if I don't have a bakkie, I cannot start up with a farm. Yes, for mode of transport, yes, it will be needed, but it's not a compulsory actual item, or it's not a, it's important, but it's not compulsory that we have. We might start up with a mode of transportation that is very easy with you, maybe by hiring out, but at some point aiming that I must have a bakkie to run around the area in terms of actually making sure that my farm is monitored and managed very well. Because remember earlier, I mentioned that you need to be around in your farm so that you can monitor everything that is happening within your farm. All the daily activities, you must be aware of them. And also, the buildings are very important to start up in your farm. For residential purpose, for the laborers that will be involved in your farming, they need to stay around your farm, and also to ensure that some of the equipment are stored safely. Like if you have a planter or you have a baler, it needs to be stored somewhere so that in case of rains, it doesn't actually, it's not exposed to that rainwater, because at some point it can easily get rusted. So if it's housed or is stored in a safe place, it's better that way. So by applying all those method or basic thing, just basic thing that you need as a farm, at least you will have started somewhere. The other major actually factors or equipment, they will follow at a later stage when you can actually, you have realized that as a farmer now, you are able to generate more profit or more income so that you can increase also all other supporting items or equipment. And also we talked about fencing earlier. Fencing also can play a role because as a farmer, you are responsible for your own animals. So you don't need your animals to get loose. You need to know where they are, and also you need to make sure to ensure that you will have actual access or monitor them in an easy way. So fencing will help with regards to that. And also you can work through your local agricultural livestock cooperatives that can guide you with the size of fencing that you will need as a farmer and the type of fencing or parameter fencing that you will need as a farmer. But a proper fencing will do all in your farming communities. Now you have actually arranged, or we have actually taken all those factors into consideration, what you will need in terms of equipment and infrastructure. And then now, the important point now is to choose the breed that will actually do better in your farming area. So with the number of breeds that we have in South Africa, I think we have about 39 to 40 registered breeds. So it may be quite difficult for someone who's starting with cattle farming, which breed to choose as a farmer, because the breed societies as well as the marketers will be telling you that, no, choose this breed because it's a quality breed. It produces animals that grow quicker, that are in demand from the feedlot, easy calving actually traits, and also high reproduction, or they are high fertile, drought tolerant, or heat resistance, almost the same similar qualities that they will tell you as the farmer. But there are some certain factors that you need to consider as a farmer, like the environment. You need to know your environment. So the environmental factor will play a very important role. The production system also that you want to pursue, you need to consider it before you choose the breed that will suit in your farm. The breeding actually, the production system that you will be using in your farm, and the breeding system as well is very important, as well as the market requirement. So if maybe we can go back to the environment itself as the factor that you need to consider before you choose a certain breed. When we talk about environment, we talk about the quantity, the quality, as well as the seasonal variation of the grass or of the grazing. Where the grazing or grass is very sparse, or in a dry area where you find that you have few grass, in other words, you have limited grazing, you need to go for a small to medium frame animal. Because if you buy or you start with a large frame animal, remember, the bigger the animal, the more that animal will demand maintenance. And now if you don't have enough grazing capacity or grazing that is available, and you go for a larger frame animal, that animal will struggle to perform and also to reproduce as well. That will affect now the profitability of your farm. So in such environment, you need actually a small to medium frame animal. But if you are in an environment where you have a large plain of grazing, you can go for large frame animal. Another environmental factor that you need to consider is climate as well. Where there's high humidity and high temperatures, you need also to choose the correct breed. So a correct breed that will fit in that environment is a breed with a smooth coat, with a large movable skin surface for heat exchange purpose, and also a breed with smooth hair and a coat, so that it can benefit in that environment. And also you will be considering again, in most cases where the environment is hot and humid, there is high infestation of external parasites, more especially ticks. So the breed that will survive and perform and thrive under those harsh environment will be such a breed that has a smooth coat and also a large movable skin surface that will also do better in terms of heat exchange. Also, the exposed area are very important, like the radiations in terms of color on exposed areas like eyes, like hooves, like the genital areas. If you have noticed as farmers that even if you are not a farmer, you have noticed that by nature, most of the wild animals, we're talking about South Africa or Africa, when you look at the skin pigmentation or radiation around the eyes, they are black in color. The genitals are blacker, the hooves are blacker. So an animal with black and amber hooves will actually survive better in such environment where the temperature are very high and the humidity is very high compared to the animals with white hooves. So you need to consider also those skin color in terms of radiations. And also we talked about the production system. So with regards to production system, we talk about some farmers will be practicing a winner production system. Some farmers will be practicing an ox production system. So for a winner production system, if you're a farmer, you are breeding your animals. When the winners are at the right age, you win them and you sell them to feedlotters or you sell them to abattoirs. So if you are practicing that winner production system, you can go for medium to large frame animals. That will benefit you better under that system because you know that they will quickly get to the feedlot and achieve the required weight that is needed there. But if you are practicing now an ox production system where the animals are finished or are rounded off from felt, we're talking about animals that will be at least maybe 18 months, some 2 years, even up to 3 years old. If you are practicing that type of system, which is an ox production system, there you need to go for a small to medium frame size. But I always prefer medium frame size because sometimes small frame size as farmer, if maybe you are looking for in terms of selling your product to the market, sometimes it won't give you the benefit that you were looking for. So a medium frame will do better. There on ox production system, the reason why as a farmer you cannot go for a large frame is that large frame animals take time to deposit fat. In other words, they take time because fat deposit is associated with the maturity. So they take time to mature. That will also affect now the time that that animal will be market ready. So it will take long for those animals to be market ready. That is why you go for large frame if you are practicing winner production system. The third factor to consider also before you choose a breed, it's a breeding system. If your intention is to practice the pure breeding system, it's advisable also to go for medium frame animals. And also, if your intention is to do a crossbreeding, so with crossbreeding, you can have a rotational crossbreeding, or you can have a terminal crossbreeding. For rotational crossbreeding is where you will breed your animals, and also you know that you will use your replacement heifers as your future cow head, but you can cross in terms of making sure that you have the offspring that will have more weight. So on that one, you can go also for medium frame animals. And if you want to practice a terminal crossbreeding system, a terminal crossbreeding system is where you breed and the offsprings, all the offsprings, when they are ready to be sold for meat purpose, they are sold, all the heifers as well as the bullock. You sell all your offsprings and then you remain with the old cows that you will be using for breeding. You breed them again. That is what we call a terminal crossbreeding system. There you can go for large frame animals. That will ensure that you benefit if we are using that production system or that breeding system. And the fourth factor to consider before you choose the breed that will suit in your environment is the market requirement. You must know what does the market want. Our market in South Africa, they prefer a class A animal with a carcass weight of 240 to 250 kilograms, with also a fat coverage of A2 to A3. So an A2 fat coverage, we're talking about an animal that is 1 to 2 teeth. So you must know also the age will determine if the animal will be categorized into A2 in terms of meat classification, A2 or A3. But also bear in mind that there is that carcass weight that is very important, because you don't need a carcass weight that is too large. Also, you don't need a carcass weight that is actually too small. So 240 carcass weight to 250 carcass weight will do better, also bearing in mind the age of that animal. So to satisfy that market, you need to go for medium, also to medium frame animals. And also there is a preference in terms of consumers to determine actually the quality of the product or the meat that is needed on the market. Most of South African consumers, they prefer a tender, juicy, and tasty meat. So that meat actually is received, I cannot specify a breed, but it differs within the genetic potential as per breed. So there are some breeds that are known of their tenderness, of their marbling, of their taste in terms of meat quality. So as a breeder now, you need to ensure that before I start choosing this breed, conduct various breed societies, attend a lot of workshops, attend a lot of farmers' days, attend some training courses to ensure that you equip yourself with all those actually, with all that, that knowledge and experience that will enable you as a farmer to choose the correct breed that will satisfy your market as you are looking to be commercial viable as a farmer. And also other factors that you need to consider is the availability of that breed within your area, and also the affordability of the breed. As we have heard earlier that when Aneli was doing introduction, that the farmers are passionate about their breeding. They can actually, we have heard recently that there's a farmer who purchased a 4.4 million bull. So you need to consider that, do I afford that bull? It means that that farmer can afford, because you don't need to go for something that you cannot afford. Do I have enough money to purchase that those animals? Where do I get those breeding stock as a farmer, as a startup farmer? And also you need to get the performance data as per that breed. What is the average performance of that breed in terms of their cow head, in terms of their breeding bull head? And also you need to ensure that the availability of breeding bulls within that breed, are they easily accessible? And also, in case maybe you decide to say, I want to do artificial insemination, how easy do I get access to those semen for that bull in that particular breed society? And lastly, but not least, the general temperament of the animal. You don't need a wild, actually behaving animal, because that if it's behaving like that, it can easily get injured. Also, as a handler or as a headman, you can get injured by that animal. That will affect also productivity in your farm. Lastly, breed choice is like choosing a wife. You need to choose a breed that you like as a farmer. So thank you.
Annelien, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. I said, Thokozani, you made me laugh with your quote that choosing the right bull is like choosing the right wife. And I agree with you on that one. Thokozani, we've received some questions, and could you please tell us more or explain to us, if at all possible, and if possible, how profitable beef cattle production is in a communal setting for communal farmers?
Thank you, Annalie, and thank you also for this important question. Because remember, we mentioned the issue of land, of which most of the farmers can't access land as compared to others. So in a communal setup, you don't have control over the land. It's not easy for you to camp or to fence that area. So what is very important, if you are in a communal setup, work in groups as farmers there. You can form a cooperative, you can form a livestock association, but you know that if you have a structure with one common goal, at least when you plan some of the activities or you are planning with regards to cattle farming, it makes work very easy, and also you will have the same breeding goals. And in other words, you can see where you are going as farmers. We are able also, if you want to breed with best bulls, you can actually, because you have common understanding, you can get actually, even if it's not a stud bull, but a good commercial bull that will benefit you as farmers in that area. And also, you need to work close with your local Department of Agriculture, because they have extension officers there, they have animal health technicians, they have veterinarians who can help you as farmers in that area. Also, ensure that you participate in all farming activities in your area by forms of study groups. You can have farmers' days, informal trainings and workshop, focus sessions in different aspects of livestock farming. By doing that, at least as farmers, you can be profitable in that area, because it will equip you as farmers in terms of controlling also your grazing. But I think there's someone who will be talking about the managing your grazing. But if you have common understanding, it can make work easy to you as farmer. Unlike if you are farming individuals. If you are farming individuals, it won't actually ensure profitability within that communal setup.
And you've also referred to in your presentation about the importance of weighing your animals and animal recording or animal performance recording. What or which weights are the most important for a commercial farmer to record?
Okay. Yes, weight are very important in different stages of production life of the animals. The most important weight is winning weight, not to say other weights are not important, but it might be difficult at some point, because especially if you are in an area where you don't have in-camping system, like in a communal setup. Yes, it's important also to have mating record, actual mating records, as well as weight. When the animals, before they breed, you weigh the cows, the breeding cows, you weigh the bulls as well. When they calve, also you weigh the weight of you weigh the cows as well as the calves. But that one is not compulsory. The important one is the winning weight, because now to determine how much did that animal grow from birth to winning. Even if you didn't weigh it at birth, you can use the standard birth weight as per that breed or as per that frame size. There are some small frame, there will be medium frame, there will be large frame. So each frame size will have a standard birth weight. So you can use that weight if you didn't weigh your animal at birth. So winning weight is important in such a way that you will be able now to determine if this animal was able to gain, or this winner was able to gain 50% of its mother weight, and also evaluating it at the same.
Thank you. Now our time with Thokozani has run out, and now we're moving to the next member of the panel. Please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and then carry on with your presentation, please.
Thank you. Annalie, before the host has stopped my video, okay, so I can start my video now again. Thank you.
There you are.
Thank you. My name is Igshaan Samuels, and I'm a specialist researcher with the Agricultural Research Council. And my field of research is in livestock management and grazing systems. So that is what I'm going to talk to you about this morning. And I will do a PowerPoint presentation. So just a few seconds and I'll just share my presentation. Can you just tell me if it's in slide mode?
Not yet.
Okay.
But I can see it. Yes. Okay.
So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I think my presentation will touch on what my colleague at the ARC Thokozani has spoken about, but it's also for especially important for those who are considering farming, and for those who have forgotten the basic principles of farming, because you have to know and remember these principles in order for you to be sustainable and to be profitable. There's no other second choice about it. These basic principles you have to remember and imply or apply during your farming practices. So I will go through the basics principles with you, and then we'll touch on about the different grazing systems. So let's start from the beginning. So as farmers, particularly livestock farming, is considered like it's a nature-based land use system. You're dependent on the natural resources of the land in order to make a living. And those natural resources include, what the climate brings us, the rainfall, the temperatures that you need, and also the wind that you need, for example, for seed dispersal. The soil is important. It absorbs the water from the rain, but it's the medium where all the plants grow in. So that's another important resource. And the other one is the vegetation itself, because if you do cattle farming and if you do extensive cattle farming on farms, it's the natural vegetation that is by and large your main source of nutrition for the animals. And you need to consider the dynamics, the differences in those things as well. And we will go into a bit more further detail into the different vegetation, because the vegetation or the plant growth of, for example, KwaZulu-Natal is not the same as the plant growth in the Northern Cape. The plant growth in Limpopo is not the same as the plant growth in the Western Cape, for example, but I'll take you through the steps. Firstly, South Africa, if you can see the red and the blue on your screen, that is the only region in South Africa that receives their rainfall in winter. So currently we're in winter, and that is why the Western Cape and that little blue part of the Northern Cape called Namakwaland, that is the only part in South Africa that's currently very wet. We're getting cold and wet, but you in the other parts of South Africa where there's no color, or it's a light brown color, you are cold, but you're not so wet. And then along the coast, up from more or less George, right along Port Elizabeth, East London, Durban, up to the borders of Mozambique, those areas get more or less rainfall all the year round. So it's very important. So wherever you are located, know which are the most important period where the rain falls. That's very important, and we'll take you through those importance later. So rainfall, you have winter and summer and all year rainfall, but also in South Africa, the amount of rainfall is not equally spread through South Africa. For example, on your left, the light orange yellow color, that's more or less the Northern Cape, and those parts of South Africa receive the least amount of rainfall. They get less than 100 millimeters per annum. Then you move to the east, you go through central parts of South Africa, Free State, parts of the Northwest, the Eastern Cape. But if you come down to bits of Mpumalanga, KZN, and the Eastern Cape, those parts in the country receives the most amount of rainfall. So know where you are located and know more or less what type of rainfall you get in your area, because that is the most important source of water for the plants. You can't irrigate the veld. They are dependent on the rainfall. Again, let's take you through some basic other information. So because the rainfall differs, and when it rains differs, you get different plant growths in different parts of South Africa. And if you group these plant growths, we usually call them biomes, where, for example, if you look at the sort of brownish color, Northern Cape, Northwest, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and a bit of the KZN and little bit of the Eastern Cape is what they call the savanna. Savanna is basically where you have a understory, a bottom layer of grasses, and you have a top layer of trees. So there's a mix of trees and grasses. But if you look at the darkish blue here, that's mostly what we call the grasslands, mostly KZN, and the bits of Gauteng and the Free State, bits of Northwest and Mpumalanga is what we call the grasslands. There's almost no trees, very little trees, and most of the trees that you get are in the river. So that is basically grasslands. And the savanna and your grasslands are more or less where your cattle farming takes place in South Africa. Other parts in South Africa, for the light blue Namakuru, is dry grasses and a little bit of shrubs, but it's mostly sheep farming. And then you get your other darker green colors, like the fynbos in the Western Cape. There's no livestock farming because the plants are not very nutritious for animals. That's why there's not a lot of farming or livestock farming happening in the Western Cape, apart from those on planted pastures or in the Renosterveld. But generally, compared to the rest of South Africa, we don't have much potential for livestock farming. And then there are other types of biomes, but the most important ones is the savanna and the grasslands is where cattle farming can thrive. So, and I'm going to give you the basic principle that you would always have to remember as a farmer. So rainfall differs, the plant growth differs. And what does it mean? It means that there are certain areas in South Africa where you can keep more animals per hectare than other parts. So for example, if you look at the very dark green colors here in KZN, Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, bits of the Free State, you can have up to, in terms of the grazing capacity, you can have up to maybe 3-4 hectares that you need for one bull or for one cow. But if you look at the very extreme right, where the red colors are, you'll be surprised that you actually need about 100 hectares per cow. And in some areas, it goes up to, I think the highest is 140 hectares. So how much cows you can keep or how much cattle you can keep on the land depends on the grazing capacity. You can't keep 1 million animals where the grazing capacity says you can only keep 4. It doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. It's not profitable. And you're going to basically damage the land. So keep that in mind. Where you are located, know where you are located, and what the grazing capacity is. So Thokozani was talking about a viable farm size of 750 hectares. So it depends where in the farm 750 hectares is. If it's here in the dark green, yes, you can keep up to maybe 100, 120, 130 cows. But if you're in the red area here, you can only keep probably 3 or 4 cows. So know in the landscape or in the country what the grazing capacity is. That is extremely very important. So, but not all land in South Africa is available for grazing, right? We've got cities, we've got towns, we've got villages, we've got national parks, we've got just areas where there's no livestock farming, we've got areas where crop farming occurs. There's no livestock happening there. So the latest figures show that about still 75% of South Africa is still suitable for farming. But it's suitable for different types of farming. So Thokozani was talking about know the breeds and know the landscape, where they have a small, medium, or large scale frame. But in the context of Africa, it also where they have to have cattle or sheep or goats. And so your vegetation, the availability of land also dictates what type of livestock species you can keep there. So this is basically just to show you where, if anything has got a color, it means there's still grazing land available, but the different colors mean the different grazing capacities. For example, the purple area here, you can keep very few animals as compared to the dark green colors. Let's take it a bit further and say, okay, so how much grazing land is available for the different provinces? So the most grazing land is obviously available in the Northern Cape because it's the biggest province, but also in the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, Free State, Northwest, and so forth. So there's still a lot of land available. And at some provinces, it's 90% of the Northern Cape is still grazing land, 83% of the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, 77, KwaZulu-Natal, 65, Mpumalanga in the Western Cape seems to have the fewest amount of land still available for grazing. But the size of the land needs to be related to the grazing capacity. Say, for instance, the Northern Cape has got the most land available, but you can't keep so many animals as compared to the Eastern Cape because there's more rain in the Eastern Cape and the grazing capacity is more in the Eastern Cape. So this is more or less, so in total, South Africa, if they are to do sustainable farming and not depend on any feed, for example, just on the natural vegetation, we can keep about 9 million cattle in South Africa. This is what the grazing capacity says. So you all want to operate the farm still, but at the national scale, you also have to take all these figures into consideration. So I'm just trying to give you the basics of farming in terms of what you need to know. A very, very extremely important lesson is that because you have different rainfall throughout the year, the amount of food available for the cattle differs during the year. So if you look at the summer rainfall areas, which is basically almost all of South Africa besides the Western Cape and along the coast, your May to September is more or less your winter and it doesn't rain. So your grasses are dry, grasses are eaten, it hasn't grown yet, there's not a lot of food available. So the supply, the resource is very low during that period of the year. But when it rains, you get the green plants coming up, the flowers coming up, and you know, there's a lot more food for the animals and you don't need to feed them anything. So your supply varies. So the demand that you put on the supply also needs to be in sync with the supply. So you can't have, for instance, your greatest demand for food when the supply is low. No, you need to match the same pattern. And that's very, very important. So how do you match the same pattern? It's either, if you know where is June, May, June is coming, the grasses are going to be very little, not a lot of food, you start selling your animals. You plan that is the time of the year, for example, that you start selling your animals, or you move your animals away to another area. And why is it important for you to match this supply? It's because nature will take its course. There's nothing you can do about it. If you are not in sync with nature, you will lose productivity, your animals will get thin, you will make less money, there will be a loss in the reproduction of the animals. You know, not every animal might get pregnant. And then also some animals will die. And that is just, it's not, and I put it specifically at the bottom, it's not, there's no option yes or no about it. That's a rule of nature. Animals will die if you're not following the same pattern. Natural wild animals follow the same pattern. They breed during when there's times of, or the animals are born when there's a lot of resources, a lot of water available. So as I mentioned, farming is part of nature. So you need to be in sync with nature. You can't do the opposite. Otherwise you will suffer. Some of these examples, it's very, very ugly pictures, but it's just something just for us to remind ourselves that if we don't follow the basic principles of nature, these might be the options, or there might be the consequences. So the key lesson that I want to tell you, the second one, apart from knowing just the grazing capacity, is match the forage demand with the supply in the forage. So how do we estimate the demand? So these are just in general terms. So if you have one bale of hay, you can feed it for 3 cows for a day, or you can have 1 cow feeding on 1 bale of hay for 3 days. Okay, so in order of 1 cow, you need 10 bales of hay. Say, for example, the bales of hay is 20 kgs of dry matter. So you would need 10 bales for each month. If you look at it in the equivalent of a sheep, 1 bale of hay can feed 20 sheep for 1 day, or one sheep can graze on one bale of hay for 20 days. And for a month, you need about 1.5 bales of hay. Why I bring up sheep and cattle is that often those who keep cattle also keep sheep because they are both grazers. And sometimes you diversify your livestock because a sheep you can sell much more easier than a cow, and the reproductive rates are a bit faster. So if you have one cow, you need about 120 to 125 bales of hay a year. That's more or less equivalent to 2.5 tons of dry grass, or about 10 tons of fresh grass. But if you can put 10 tons of felt, you need for one cow per year. And if you look at it for a sheep you need about 20 bales a year, or about 1.6 tons of felt, of fresh grass. So I'm just showing you the comparisons between cows and sheep. These are the basic ones. Just basic knowledge that you also have to consider is that if one cow with 450 kgs is your standard, and you take different animals in relation to the standard, a bull is about 1.5 times the size of a cow or weight, but a heifer or a yearling sterling is, or a yearling steer or a heifer is about 70 to 90% the weight of a mature cow. A 2-year-old heifer is more or less the same. A calf is about 40% of its mother. If you look at a sheep is about 1/5 to a quarter of the weight of a cow, but it depends on the physiological condition of a ewe. A young lamb, for example, you can have about only 13% the weight of a cow. And this is just showing you cows and sheep, but there is what they call it the Meissner table, and it gives you every animal, livestock species, and some of their physiological condition, but also give you wildlife animals. How much do they weigh in relation to a cow? It's very important, because if you are farming with cows, and that happens in many farms, there are also other wild animals that you might not even farm with. There's maybe a zebra, there's an impala, or there's a kudu and all of that. And the reason why I'm saying is that every animal that grazes on the rangeland has got an impact on the rangeland. So you have to, whatever calculations you do, you have to consider what other animals there as well, if you want to farm sustainably. Because, for example, if your farm grazing capacity says you can keep 10 cows, okay, you keep 10 cows, but then there are 300 zebras. It doesn't make sense, because you will not be sustainable, because you didn't consider the other animals' impact that they can have. So that is a very important thing to note. And this information is available for all the grazing species in South Africa, including wild animals. So if you are going through these lean periods, like for example, the winter months, if you're in a summer rainfall area, you need to consider, and in farming, long-term planning is extremely important, extremely important, because we're going through very rough patches due to climate change. And what I can tell you, the scenarios for South Africa is the droughts will increase in South Africa. There will be more droughts, and the droughts will be more severe and will be more longer. So, for example, if you tap yourself on the hand, the tapping will get faster and will get longer, and you will feel the pain much more. Exactly the same with drought. The longer the droughts are, the more intense, the more pain it will inflict on you as a farmer. So planning for drought is very important. There's no way escaping a drought will come. It's inevitable. You can't stop that. So thinking long-term would be maybe planting, whether it's a planted pasture of meadows or lucerne or ryegrass, or just winter or cereals, oats and wheat or barley, whatever. You can always then harvest and store it for your drier periods. It's very important that planning becomes an important aspect of farming. It's not only what you have now. The conditions for now will not be the same conditions for tomorrow. Everything changes. The climate changes, the environment changes, the market changes, and your relationship with your neighbors changes, the condition of the animal changes. So something on the farm, it's very important. Change will always happen, and you need to consider and to plan for those changes. Another aspect that's sort of emerging more recently is hydroponic farming, where you plant fodder not on the land, because sometimes we know a lot of people have abandoned plowing traditionally because it doesn't rain on time, or there's not enough rain, or there's stray animals. So they do sort of hydroponic fodder farming. So you're in a highly commercialized, controlled environmental sort of system, or you can do it low-tech, just under shade netting or a sheet. As exhibit to here, it's a communal farmer on the bottom right. So you can choose what type of setup you want to have, but these are options for you to produce fodder. And why I'm saying that is, buying feed is expensive. Yes, you might do it now and then, but buying feed all the time, you're not going to be profitable and you're not going to be sustainable. So we know these basic principles that I told you. So let's just touch on a bit of basic veld management. Obviously, it can be very detailed, but I'm simplifying it for you just to know the basic principles. So if you look at here, whatever your land potential is, you can be in the highest parts in South Africa where you have the highest grazing capacity and you can keep so many animals. But if your management is poor, your veld management is poor, you can't keep so many animals. So if you can see here, if you have good veld management, you on high potential land, your productivity and your profitability goes up. But if you have poor veld management, no matter where you are, you will not be successful. Let's put it just in sort of a schematic form. Is if you have good veld in the higher rainfall areas like KZN, Mpumalanga, Eastern Cape, you can keep a lot of animals. But if you have good veld in low rainfall, you can keep fewer animals. So irrespective of whether veld is good, your rainfall determines how much you can keep. So compare good veld with high rainfall with poor veld with high rainfall. You can only keep fewer animals. So poor veld is a result of poor management. Also know that, okay? So again, poor veld in low rainfall, you can even keep less animals. So important message is have good farming management principles. This is just an example of two different farming systems by two neighbors. You have much more grasses on the left, Bushman grass, steppe grosses, and fewer here on the right. So this veld arrested a lot, and you obviously the potential is to keep there to keep more animals there as well. Another difference, particularly in the wetter grasslands and savanna areas, a different farming management, but on the right is what they call bush encroachment. It's a result of you have animals and they just take too much of the grasses away, and there's more space for the trees to grow. To such an extent that trees grow too high, animals can't eat it anymore, or the fires won't even damage it. And those land is regarded as poor veld, and the production potential of your farm will also go very much down to that as well. Another impact that you can result is soil erosion. You just take all the cover away and the rain comes and blows away all the topsoil. And remember, you can't farm with any topsoil. So these are just some of the impacts that you can have on the environment. There's a farmer, when I was talking to farmers, I often hear they say things like, I don't farm with animals, I farm with the veld. And that is true. And another farmer told me, whatever I wear, what I drive, what I eat is dictated by the veld. So the veld determines my lifestyle. And if you look at it, if you have good veld, you can make more good money. But if you have poor veld, there's only so much income you can get. And it makes sense because he realizes the importance of good veld. Lastly, just to the different grazing systems, there are many, believe me, there are many in South Africa. I'm just trying to break it down into the three larger groups. The one group is what we call continuous grazing system, where animals graze in a camp or they graze around the homestead for the entire year. There's no movement of the animals. They are always there. Well, you can always say, then you don't need any fences. You don't need any capital investment if you do that. But there are also disadvantages of continuous grazing. So the animals will then just select the best plant species. At the end of the day, what you have is a landscape with low quality food. So you can't produce a lot of animals. if you graze the area without any rest, so what's going to happen during a period of feed shortages? You don't have a reserve. Very important. Many farmers have what they call a grazing reserve, camps or parts of the veld that they don't graze. So when a drought comes, they have some sort of reserves and they don't have to buy much feed. So when you do continuous grazing, you can't do that. And then also, if you stock the veld continuously, your quality of your animals will go down because of the poor veld that will result. Another common one, particularly amongst commercial farmers, is what they call a rotational grazing system, where animals are moved between different parts of the range of the veld or between different camps. So the farmer can control how long an animal can be in a camp, or the farmer can control how long an animal should stay out of a camp. Okay, so and in this way you can always reserve veld for the dry month periods. So this is a basic illustration. What I mean, so you have your brown color here. The animals are grazing there now. They graze up to 50 to 70% of the grass. Then they move to the next camp. Then they have a sort of a long rest. The grasses can grow. The root systems are very deep, well established. And then you go on to here. You graze 50, 70%. This one would have had more time to grow. And this is how you do a rotational grazing system. This is just the basics of a rotational grazing system, but there are much more complicated ones as well. But the idea is rest. The idea is not to graze everything at once. The idea is to keep a reserve for the drought periods, and that is one of the advantages of rotational grazing. But the disadvantages is you have to erect probably many fences. It could be very labor intensive. There could be also selective grazing because the animals are in a camp and then they can just choose what they want. And in the rotational systems where camps are used, there's always a lot of time there is high predation rates, and in areas where it's close to settlements or to towns, there might be high stock theft as well. There are herding systems. The one that's mostly used actually throughout the world, mostly is herding systems. It's in the communal areas in South Africa, particularly in the Namaqualand area, where they've been using herding systems that they've been using for more than 1,000 years. So what it means is whether it's only your animal or a group of animals, they come bunched together and they are looked after by a herder during the day, and then the animal goes into the kraal at night. So the advantages is that a herder can control where the animals go. They can control which areas to rest, which areas to graze, and what time of day to graze, when to go to the water. Another advantage is that the herder can apply the indigenous knowledge. Is very important because sometimes in the veld you can just use this or that sort of plant to fix or as a remedy for yourself or for the animals. There's always that the knowledge could be used. When it's difficulties in giving birth, the herder is there. You can monitor the veld. You can say, oh, the rainfall pattern is going to rain today. Maybe I must take my animals not far away from the kraal, stuff like that. What has been shown through research all over the world, if you have a herder, your predation rates is less than 4%, and your stock theft go down. You can prevent animals from grazing poisonous plants if you're a herder. The herd effect can crush the soil crust, and infiltration will be a bit better. And then also some research have shown if you herd the animals, your animals get a better quality and a more diverse diet. But there are disadvantages also of herding. Obviously, your herder could leave you anytime, and it's always common during December times where the herder just leaves you because it's December. And if the herder is not skilled, it can actually cause overgrazing. There's a problem of herders are being paid below minimum wage, and the living condition is not in line with legislation. And it's sometimes very difficult to find a competent herder these days, but South Africa has got a herding school now in the Eastern Cape, the herding academy, but there are also, believe it or not, very herding schools in Europe, especially in France and in Spain. It's accredited courses, and what I found out is actually people who attend who want to be herders are people with degrees, master's degrees, and are women who actually want to be herders. And the reason is they want to go back to a more quiet rural lifestyle. So what I'm trying to say is that being a herder is not necessarily you being devalued. It is just that you have chosen to be that specific career, and it's a skilled course, it's a professional course that is being offered. So it doesn't necessarily mean if you're a herder, you are under lower ranks of society. So this, I think I will stop there, Annelie, and that's just to give the attendees some basic principles of farm management. Thank you, Annelie.
Thank you so much, Igshaan. I've got just one question for you, and the question is it advisable to have two livestock species in one camp, say cattle and sheep, or should it be sheep in one camp and cattle in the other camp?
It's advisable. I would prefer mixed, particularly if mixed, for instance, goats are what they call browsers. They eat more on the top layer, the shrubs and the trees, and you can prevent sort of bush encroachment by that. So it's either the best would be either sheep or goats, or cattle and goats, because cattle and sheep more or less graze the same resource, the grasses, but goats then go for the shrubs. So then again, because cattle and sheep don't often graze the trees, you miss out on that resource that you could be used for farming goats. So a mixture, which is actually good because you can actually increase your profitability. And sometimes for a mixture, it's important. For example, a drought comes. In the hot, dry conditions, a lot of sheep might die, but your goats, for example, might stay alive. So it is advisable to have a mixed species, and that's what wildlife are. You won't find zebras, and there are no wildebeest or no other impalas around. A mixture, it's benefit for each other, and they can also warn each other if there's a predator or something like that. So I would, yeah, it's good to have a mixture.
Thank you very much. It was a highly informative presentation, and I think as the veld being the most important resource, our viewers should take cognizance of this. And now we're moving on to the next panelist for the introduction and also the presentation on his or her matter of experience and expertise.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matshidiso Mooketsi, a female farmer from Northwest and Northern Cape provinces. I'm a passionate female farmer who has been doing livestock farming since 2008. I'm a grandma of two little grandkids. And yes, we started with our farming in 2008 with only 6 sheep and 7 mixed cattle. And as they say, the rest is history. We rented a farm somewhere in Tosca, in the Molopo municipality. And we started with our farming until we came, across a challenge of lack of water on that particular farm. We farmed for 1 year, 4 months without water on that particular farm. And I think this is where we garnered our strength, and our experience, intensive experience in cattle farming. Throughout our farming journey, we've won accolades, one of which was Emerging Beef Cattle Farmer in 2012, a competition that took us to the United States to attend a beef cattle symposium. And since then, it was in 2014, since then we came back, encouraged after seeing how the world out there is doing their business. It hasn't been easy as an emerging cattle farmer, especially in the financial, aspect. Lack of capital is what we, Black emerging farmers are really battling. But we've been striving to do things right record keeping, following strict, financial management, but sometimes we fail to, you will think you've done your homework, but all of a sudden you experience, financial challenges. But with the passion we have, we broke through. And it's our intention, to become registered stud breeders of Bonsmara breed. And I think, we are emotionally ready to take, the bull by its horns. And I would like to advise my fellow beef cattle farmer or my fellow farmers that, without passion, we are doomed to failure. You can have land, you can have equipment, we can have animals, but without that burning passion in our hearts and the love for our country, patriotism, that I normally preach to people, that if you are patriotic enough, you will do what is right. You'll try to do a greater good at all times, of which it is something that we are trying to achieve. Yes, I'm based in Northwest, but I have stretched to Northern Cape because I've realized there is a greater good that I could share with my fellow, farmers in the John Taolo district area, which is in Kurumani. And this is where we are now, focusing on sharing our skills with the local farmers. So yes, the sky is the limit, but with passion for what we do, for our farming business, for the animals, and taking care of the environment, looking after the environment, the system will reward us in a way. And I think we should start doing that. We should start looking after our environment, which is crying, for us as humans, as occupants of this planet, to take care of it, to look after it well. If we should teach our kids to look after the environment. We are littering everywhere. So we should really rethink the way we are doing things and see if in a way we could be, rewarded and abundantly for that matter. So I would like to really speak to my fellow farmers that I pray that we find passion. We love, what we do wholeheartedly. And I think, yes, that's the story of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. Matshidiso, you and I have met quite often during the past. And I want to ask you, for a beginner farmer, what is the most important? Quality animals or a quantity of animals?
You know what, Annalyn? Once you have passion, because with passion is the number one ingredient to achieving that. It's all about quality product that one has to produce. That is what the market wants, quality. So we should stick to producing quality at all times. If you have, less quality, let's say cows, what do? You go out and look for a stud bull, to come and improve your production. So yeah, I believe quality, speaks volume.
I think I tend to agree with you. And then I also want to ask you, as a female, Tell us a little bit shortly about why you decided to take the stud breeding role or route from commercial to stud.
You know what, we live and breathe this, brand, our brand. And it shows that, by being exposed to such level, one has, went through all the stages, it's like you've met all the challenges that will make you to, to grab this bull by its horns, you understand?
Yes,
So
I
I
do.
think, yeah, so I think we are now, that is why I say we are now emotionally ready to go this route of stud breeding, so that we can, put our brand on the agricultural map and start sharing the skill, with upcoming farmers. Yes.
Well, that's we wish you luck in the new steps in your career. Thank you so much. And another question that
Yes.
many new farmers struggle with is financing and funding. Your take on this?
Come again, may you repeat the question again?
Many new and emerging farmers planning to go on to become commercial farmers struggle with access to funding and finances. How did you do it?
Our government is trying by all means to assist us by, giving us grants. But we cannot continue asking for those grants. I mean, we can't be freebies at all times. You have to grow at a certain stage. The grant that we got, in 2008, the head of cattle, or the Nguni head cattle, took us to another level. So it's like from 2008 up to now, it seems there is something, a little bit, of improvement that we are doing that makes, the private sector to believe in us. Because companies like Agri-Credit Solutions, Noorkap, Levendehave, Land Bank, they are now able to borrow us money. Where did we start? We started by grants, but we had to graduate. We couldn't be babies all the time. Yes, so you use grants, to build you up until you are financially, until you are able to convince, the private lenders that you are able, you are trying to do something better.
Thank you, Matshidiso. That's valuable advice for every upcoming and person who wants to become a beef producer. And now, Dawie Maree, we are now moving to Dawie, and we're waiting to hear what you have got to say to us. Please introduce yourself, and then we're waiting for your presentation.
Good morning, Annelie. Thank you for the webinar from Farmers Weekly. I think it's an important one. I'm, as I've said, Dawie Maree. I'm the head of information and marketing with FNB Agriculture. I'm an agricultural economist by trade, growing up in the Northwest Province on a cattle farm. So I have a big passion for the cattle industry. So just please don't tell that to the grain people or the fruit people. I'm going to share my screen with you and run through a quick presentation. We've talked, and the panelists talked a lot about the technical side of livestock farming and so forth. My question will be, to beef or not to beef, and with apologies to Shakespeare on that. Just before I continue, as a proper financial institution, I must tell you this is not financial information, and please don't make decisions on this. I prefer to use the following disclaimer, that I would be responsible for what I'm going to say, and you for what you understand from that. I always tell the media they must listen carefully about this. So on the agenda, I'm just going to run through some basic terms and financial ratios, some financial statements that we look at, and then obviously the process when you apply for credit or you want some finance. And then lastly, and it's not on here, I will just give a brief outlook on how we see the livestock industry going forward and so on. So some basic terms that we look at, and I think that's important when farmers apply for credit or finance, or even in general financial management. You might be the best technical farmer, but you might make big mistakes in terms of your financial sustainability. So we look at the capital, fixed and current assets. Obviously, capital assets would be your farm infrastructure that you have on the farm. Pens and handling facilities would be fixed assets, and then your current assets. I think in the case of a beef farmer, your biggest current asset is your cattle herd, and then some smaller current assets. Equity, equity is that amount of capital that you put into the business. It's important that people must put some of their own money into a business as well to make it successful. And then liabilities. For a financial institution, that's a good thing. For our farmers, that's it's normally a big problem. Liabilities, that's your creditors. That's the things that you must keep as low as possible to be sustainable. And then your gross value of production. That's in simple terms your price times your output. So let's say you sell wieners. You sell 10 wieners of 10,000 Rand each. Then it's 10,000 times 10, and that's your gross value of production. That's before any costs have been subtracted. Then you've got your variable costs. That's the costs that change. The more you produce, the more that variable cost will increase. Fixed costs. That's irrespective of if you sell one wiener or you sell 1,000 wieners. Fixed costs will always stay the same. And that's normally your overheads, your telephone account or electricity. Electricity can be variable as well. And then you get to your net farm income. So net farm income is your gross value of production, less your variable cost, less your fixed cost, and you get your net farm income. And then depreciation is a big one. It's a non-cash expense expense, which we always count back because the depreciation is the value that you write off of a certain asset that you buy. In the case of cattle, you don't write off depreciation on cattle, but you write it off on your vehicles, on your tractor and your bakkie and so on. So it's just a schematic explanation of what I've said. In terms of your gross output, you can measure that per cow. That was in the past the most common one, but nowadays farmers measure that per hectare as well, or per kilogram meat produced, for example. So that depends on how you want to do it. So your gross output less your variable cost. You get your gross margin, less your fixed cost, and then you get your net margin. And there's just some examples of what the different costs will be. So if we look at some basic ratios, first of all, your debt to asset ratio, that's the amount of debt that you had in relation to the value of your assets. And in general, anything less than 40% is healthy. And we strive towards that, but it will vary between the different industries. In intensive industries, let's say, for example, export citrus industries and so on, that might be even as much as 80%. And then obviously for your extensive Karoo farmers farming with sheep or with cattle, it would be lower as well. Liquidity, that's your current ratio, is that your current assets divided by your current liabilities, and healthy ratio would be 2 to 1. So for every R1 liability that you have, you must have at least have R2 available in terms of current assets. Profitability in the end, there's a lot of ways to measure that. Total capital is but one of the measurements, and there's the formula for that. Your net farm income times 100 divided by your average total capital. Anything more than 10% is normally good. We've seen in agriculture, it's normally in the region of 8%, specifically for your extensive producers, livestock producers. So, applying for finance, we ask a lot of information, we ask a lot of documents, and these are only a few of them in terms of the financial statements. Your balance sheet, your income statement, cash flow. I'll get back to that because cash flow is king in terms of finance, and then budgets and a business plan. So if you look at the balance sheet, just quickly, that's a snapshot of your financial position on a certain day. Normally in the beginning of your financial year, you draw up the balance sheet, and that's the statement for the year. This for us as a financial institution, it's a source of information of your debt situation, long and short-term debts, your gearing, and your gearing is how much money you owe in terms of the assets that you have, and then are there any reserves available in the business. Obviously, capital assets will also be indicated on the balance sheet as well. And then from that, we can do some measurements, and you can calculate a return on investment and a return on equity, obviously, as well. In terms of your income statement, that's your profit and loss account, and that's the one account that we always say, we have 3 of them, one for the bank, one for the tax collector for SARS, and then obviously the true one that you have in the third drawer of your desk. It's a statement of your income and expenses, both fixed and variable costs, obviously, but also non-cash transactions like the depreciation I talked about earlier. It's not all expenses will be included in the income statement, because your capital expenses, and specifically big ones, will go directly to your balance sheet. But from that, we measure EBITDA, and EBITDA is a nice acronym for earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. And that's an important measure for a financial institution, is the EBITDA calculation, because that's a measure of the company's operating performance. The higher the EBITDA, obviously, the better for the company or for the business. So normally, and anybody who has done some financial record keeping will know this look, when everything in your financial statements balance. This is the big one, and the important one is your cash flow statement and your cash flow budget. And it differs from the income statement because this is only cash transactions. Non-cash like depreciation will not appear on your cash flow statement. And that's from that you will see the difference between the cash and the profit that you make, or the accounting profit. If we turn to some business plans and budgets, these documents are the policy statements for the business of the future. It doesn't matter how big or small you are, you must at least have a business plan and draw up budgets throughout the year. Everybody think, if you draw up a budget or a business plan, you're done. But that's not true. It should be a live document that needs constant revision, because the situation changed. The market changed, everything changed, prices. So you must update your business plan and your budgets regularly. With that, you can set some benchmarks. And when you set benchmarks, you have to make certain assumptions, but you must test this against objective criteria and people. Being part of a study group is always a good one, because then you can benchmark yourself against peers, against your neighbors, or businesses and farmers that might be in other areas. But it's important that you measure yourself against them to see where you can improve. Then your cash flow budget. As I've said, the cash flow is king. It's most probably the most important document, well, especially when you apply for finance. But you must apply the smarter concept when you draw up your cash flow budget. And that's just a smart acronym for what must be taken into account when you make up a cash flow budget. You should be specific. What you put in should be measurable. It's easy to put stuff in, but if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. It should be achievable. Everybody would like to earn R1 million a year, but is it achievable from your operation? It should be realistic as well. Put a time frame to it. I also want to be a millionaire, but I might achieve that over 50 years or within 5 years. So put a time frame to it, then you have a target and you can work towards that. Ethical, important, specifically with the changing dynamics in the consumer market. Ethical behavior is becoming more and more important for agricultural producers. And then record keeping. Write everything down. You can do it, and the stud farmers and the commercial farmers are very good at writing down calving percentages and mortality and everything. But in terms of finance, it's also important to record everything and to have a good bookkeeping system in place. So from a financial institution or a lender, what's our requirements? Obviously, your financial statements should have convincing evidence of affordability. The National Credit Act, the Bank Act, and all the Reserve Bank regulations focus a lot on affordability and reckless lending. So it's important that affordability can be shown from your financial statements. Ownership, obviously, is important. The bank at this stage and in South Africa, we still on a security-based system for lending. So we will not extend credit greater than the value that you own in a business. So if you, let's say you're in a partnership with another farmer and you only own 50%, the bank will not grant credit to you for more than 50% of their value. So that's important to take note. Security, as I've said, you must have sufficient assets to offer as security. More and more, it's becoming important to look at a jockey, the farmer himself. And we said, banking the jockey is important. Does he or she have the sufficient knowledge, the skills, and the experience to manage this business and to achieve the outcomes that's being set out in the statements, the business plan, and the budgets? So banking the jockey is becoming important. But like I said, security assets is still one of the important parts as well. And then when you look at a jockey, is there willingness to get expert input where he or she might be lacking it? So we will, when we look at farmers and they say, but okay, we are new in the business, will they be willing to be part of a study group or learn more from commercial experienced long-term farmers? So that willingness should also be there. And then, when you apply for credit, make sure that that credit match the purpose for what it's being intended for. So if we look at long-term loans, normally we do 10 years, but we can go up to 15 years. And that's, to buy land. That's the main reason for these long-term loans, or for major fixed improvements. It can also be a long-term loan for 10 years. And then project or medium-term loans, that's in general 5 to 10 years. That's where you want to expand your production capacity. In the case of a fruit farmer, for example, you want to put in and plant a new orchard, then you will apply for a medium-term loan. For livestock farmers, that's in general livestock purchases. For beef farmers specifically, we have a loan that goes up to 7 years because of the reproduction cycle of cattle. We found that 7 years is a good one when you want to expand your herd. You can do that with a livestock loan of 7 years. And then your short-term and seasonal or production credit. That's for production expenses on an annual basis. And we normally do that on overdraft facilities, which is payable over a year period. So for a grain farmer, for example, his production credit will be paid up at the end of the harvest season. For livestock farmers, it's normally a bit more difficult because there's not necessarily a specific season, calving season or so forth. But we can also do seasonal or production credit for livestock farmers as well. And then some guidelines, obviously for intensive agriculture, which is normally your feedlots, poultry and dairy operations and piggeries. We look at some other measures because it's intensive. For our extensive farmers, obviously that's also important to have that infrastructure, and it's also spoken about by some of the panel members, the skills and so forth. If we look at some guidelines, the debt ratio for a livestock farmer, should be in the region of 35%, which is a healthy ratio, and it's a credit guideline from our side as well. The gearing for livestock, it says there to be determined. That will depend a lot on where you are, what you're farming with, the specific breed, the location, and obviously the jockey as well. And then in terms of interest cover, at least 2 times or more than that. So meaning that, let's say you pay, you have a loan with the interest and you have to pay 1,000 Rand a year. I'm just talking numbers. Then you should at least earn more than 2,000 Rand a year to cover that interest. So the credit policy that I'm going to go briefly over this. Repayment ability of farming operations is important. When you look at agricultural loans versus lifestyle loans, there's a lot of farmers that has other jobs, week jobs, and we call them weekend farmers, or by the industry, we call it lifestyle loans. But I think in terms of an agric loan, it's important to mention that the loan must be serviced from income that's derived from agricultural activities, and it's not being serviced by a salary. Obviously, the majority ownership is important. Security, as I've mentioned, your management skills and experience. And then I've spoke about the term loans. When we look at term loans or production finance, we look at least 60% loan to value. So let's say you want to buy a farm for R1 million. The bank will extend, in most cases, only 600,000 Rand credit, and 400,000 Rand should be from own sources, just to have some skin in the game as well. This is only a benchmark. It can differ in term, in relation to the applicant, where the production system and so on. But a rule of thumb, 60% loan to value. And then applications. When you apply for an agricultural loan, that's being done through a business or a relationship manager with input from an agricultural manager, if it's necessary. We don't do online applications or so on, because from a banking perspective, it's important for us to have that relationship so that the RM or the BM, he must know what's going on your farm. So he will visit you on farm, he will look at everything and understand what you are doing. So when you have other additional requirements, he will know what to look for. So that's why we focus on that business relationship manager model. Yeah, just some turning to the industry specific, some outlook, and I don't hope I offend some vegans, but I'm sure when you're in cattle farming, you know what I'm talking about. So if we look at the gross value of production for the industry and the outlook going forward, I had to split it up into two graphs because the cattle, and that's the next one, the poultry industry, the cattle industry, and the dairy industry is much bigger than the previous one, which is, and that will just complicate the graph. But if you look at the cattle industry, we've seen since the drought of 2015-17, that time period, we've seen a good growth, and you'll see that from the blue line up to the blue bar up to the green bar. There's some good growth in the cattle industry. Obviously, the broiler industry is always growing, but that's the competition that we have in terms of the market where we play in. If we look at where production is taking place, beef production, both years are more or less the same, but it's mainly in the inland areas, in Mpumalanga, the Free State, Gauteng and Northwest, and about 8% in KZN, in terms of your brief extensive beef production. Then, obviously imports plays a major role because we don't produce enough beef in South Africa. We do export as well, but it's not at the same level that it was before the foot and mouth disease outbreak, or even comparing to the citrus or the fruit industries. But if we look at where we import from, obviously our neighboring countries, Botswana and Namibia, is playing a big role. And for 2023, this year, we expect that it would be more or less in the same percentages. But if we look at the comparison, of imported cattle that's being slaughtered, we can see it dropped down to 11, more or less 11% in 2020. That's also the recovery period for our neighboring countries when they started their rebuilding after the drought. And we've seen that for last year, it's up to 13%. And it's remained in that 13% region in terms of the imports, in terms of the slaughter numbers. So it's a substantial part, but it's not a worrying part for our beef producers. Obviously, we want to increase our production, to increase our exports in the end as well. Just a brief outlook. We've started on a positive note this month, but unfortunately, both for lamb and weaners calf prices, we've seen that we've reversed that trend. And for mid-July, and that was up to last week Friday, we've seen a decrease of about 20 cents a kilogram, ending on a national average of about 32.76 live weight price for weaner calves, much lower than it was a year ago. But we struggle to lift demand. Obviously, seasonal or the season play a role in that, and I'll get back to that. But we can see from the graph on your right bottom, the grey period or the bluish period, we've seen, we expect the prices to move more or less sideways in that 33 rand a kilogram space for the foreseeable future. We can see the declines there in terms of your carcass prices. Class C's and Class A's, Class C down 33 rand 20, Class A much more, it's 10 rand 48, and even the fifth quarter also decline. I think the challenge for the market is, we need to compete with this meatless Mondays and meatless meat and so on, and perhaps we must change our strategy and say this, vegetable less vegetables, and sell your mince as spinach, for example. Or if you're in a restaurant, try paying with monopoly money for a meatless burger. To summarize, I think for the next couple of weeks, the cold conditions that we experience will definitely place a downward trend on demand. But at least spring will come and summer will come again, and we will head into that dry months. So that will boost demand. And given the fact that the Reserve Bank kept interest rates on hold yesterday, I think that's positive. We trust that will filter through into the inflation environment, and consumers will have some disposable money available to buy more meat again. Fortunately, this wetter winter months, will be positive for the recovery of pastures and boost the regrowth when we head into the spring season. But the not so good news is the lingering El Nino weather pattern, which might pose us some risk for the summer months in terms of pasture conditions and grazing. So we might see some increased liquidation of stock heading into the summer months again. Annelies, thank you very much. I'm done, so I'm looking forward to some questions if there is any.
Dawie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Dawie, you've mentioned in your presentation that ethical behavior is going to become more and more important. Why is that? And why is it so important that livestock producers, not just cattle producers, livestock producers, take cognizance of the importance of ethical behavior?
Annelies, I think we know we are in the area of consumerism. The consumer is king. He wants to know where his food is coming from, and we've seen that in various other industries. For example, the fruit industry, where they look at ethical labor practices within the whole European Union, the global gap, and all those requirements, and that's filtering through into the livestock market. And if we speak about ethical behavior, it also goes about livestock wellness. And with that, I'm not saying you must play classical music to your cows every night, but I think just treat them fair. A lot of consumers, and especially your urban consumers, they want to see the story from where their meat is coming from. And with that in mind, the whole issue about traceability is also important for the livestock industry, because the consumer wants to know. In the end, unfortunately, we are out of the area where farmers can just produce and the market will take up the produce. We need to produce what the consumer wants. Consumer is king. They have the money, and we must produce products that they want. So that information is also important, and that's where industry organizations play an important role to inform farmers, what's happening in the market, what's the new trends, and what's the requirements.
And this goes for each and every producer, from the smallest to the biggest stud and feedlot in the country.
No, definitely, and I think if we look at, for example, at the informal, or let's call him the informal market, there is a closer relationship, because the producer know exactly what his buyer want, because they buy directly from the producer. But again, that ethical part is important.
And then, Dawie, I received a question from one of our attendees, and the question is, what are the requirements for livestock credits, and do communal farmers qualify?
I think the requirements is more or less the same. Whether you're a emerging or a communal farmer or a commercial farmer, the requirements of affordability and repayment ability is important. Obviously, for communal farmers, it's a bit more difficult, because they don't necessarily have land or other assets that can be used as security. But there is a possibility to use, and it's not in general use at this stage, but to use the cattle and register a general notarial bond against it. So it's a GNB. So the cattle serve as the security. That's a bit more a difficult one, because the financial institutions know the risks. Because when cattle is or get stolen, or when cattle die, that's normally the ones with the GNB over them. That's the first one that's got stolen. So they are wary of that, but there is possibilities. Obviously, and we've worked with other industries, and Matshidiso is also spoke about the grants. That's always a possibility to use that as security as well, and apply for that in terms of when you apply for finance, to use that as a measure. But it's still a challenging one to get the big financial institutions around to commit fully to that.
Dawie, thank you so much. Thank you for your very enlightening presentation, and also the other panelists. We are now moving to questions from our viewers and attendees. And the first questions that I have are for Igshaan. One question says, you mentioned in detail disadvantages of overgrazing, but what are the disadvantages of undergrazing? Igshaan, if you can field that question for us, it'll be very interesting.
Okay, yes, and I think that's a very important question, because we always talk about overgrazing, but we never talk about undergrazing. So here are some of the disadvantages of undergrazing. If you undergraze the land, you give more chance for the plants to grow bigger, and eventually the bigger the animal, or the bigger the plant, the older the plant, the less quality the felt is. So you will reduce the potential of the land. If you undergraze the land, the plant material, the fuel load will build up, and it becomes a greater fire risk. If you undergraze the land, it is a lost opportunity where you could have made some income from the land, because when the plants grow to a certain level, you can't actually make use of the plant. Another disadvantage is that when plants becoming bigger, they competitively exclude each other. So the biodiversity in the land also becomes less. So if you undergraze, you can actually reduce the value of your land, and it's a missed opportunity. Thank you.
I've got another question for you, Igshaan, and this is, how do one encourage non-selective grazing in a camp beside applying high-density grazing principles? Is it at all possible?
It is possible, and that's what a lot of herders are doing to prevent non-selective grazing, because if they see the animals only going in one direction or one part, they would direct the animals in another part. But what you can also do is you can keep your animals on the land if they are not herded a little bit longer, so that because animals will obviously try and eat the most nutritious first, and then they go for a reduced nutrition, nutritionist plants. So keep them a little bit more so they can reduce, so that they can eat the less nutritionist plants as well, but do not let them overgraze the land where you just see the sand, where you just see the rocks. So that is some of two ways you can do it without applying high density grazing. Thanks.
Thokozani, for you, I've got quite a few questions on breed selection. Like questions, is it advisable to breed Bonsmara in a communal land, or do you prefer Boran or Brahman? And then it boils down to one thing: which cattle breed is the best for cattle farming? I personally believe we've got the best cattle breeds in the world, but we'd love to hear what you say.
Okay, no, thank you, Colin. Yes, in a communal setup, it's quite challenging because, first of all, the grazing is not controlled, and also in some areas it's mountainous, it's rocky. But with regards to Bonsmara, I will advise someone who's in a communal setup to start with a Bonsmara commercial, not a pure breed. Because in Bonsmara, we have a bloodline for Afrikaner, which is our indigenous animal. In other words, even if the area is a bit hot and maybe with high humidity, because of that Afrikaner blood that it carries, it won't struggle that much. But a commercial Bonsmara will do better than a pure breed Bonsmara in a communal setup. And also, with regards to the type of breed that is suitable, the suitability of that breed will differ depending on the climatic conditions of that region, the availability of grazing, as well as the diseases in that area. We know most of our indigenous breed, which is our Afrikaner, Nguni, Drakensberger, Tuli, we can include also Ankole. They perform better in such environment in our country. But maybe to add some of the Zebu breed, which is Brahman, because Brahman also can survive our other conditions or other harsh conditions that we might be facing in our land. Yes, I would say those are the breeds that can survive better in a communal, in an area where it's hot and warm or high humidity.
Thank you, Thokozani. Matshidiso, I've received a question on your cattle, your Bonsmara weaning weights and birth weights. Can you please tell us more about that?
Yes, you know, for one to get better quality of one's products is following, you know, the right herd management program, supplementing, vaccinating, you know, accordingly. So we weigh our birth, we weigh at birth, we weigh the weights rather at birth up to weaning and when we are, you know, culling or selling to the market. So I don't know if I don't know if I covered the question well.
I would like to know your average weaning weight.
The average weaning, yes, I'm sorry about that. It's 85 to 90%. That's the average weaning weight on our farm.
Yeah.
Kilograms? In kilograms?
Yes.
In kilograms?
Our weaning weight is 220 to 250. Sometimes we keep it below 280. we must, emphasize, that we must practice at all, try to practice, most of the time to keep it below 280 kilograms. Yes.
And why is that?
Yes, that's what the market wants. The market wants quality. Yeah, the market wants quality. You can't take, underweight, your animals should be enticing. They should, confuse the buyers, and everyone should be, your product should be in high demand. Yes, so that is what we believe in, quality. That's what the market, needs. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then Dawie, our very last question is for you. And the question is, can we use security in the form of our private vehicles in applying for loans?
Annelie, that's a bit more difficult one. How can I say it? The answer should be yes, but I think in practicality, you will get, a very low security value from that private vehicle in terms of what you need to apply for finance. So practically yes, technically yes, but practically I don't think that would be feasible.
Thank you, Dawie. You don't even want to consider my old car for buying a new little heifer. But thank you so much, all our panelists. Thank you so much for everybody who joined us, and may you have a beautiful day.